We have Reverend James Gaither. So glad, so delighted. And you're seeing us in our sanctuary. And I'm going to turn my camera around so that our lit candles and our monitor. So go ahead. We are all yours.
All right. Well, it's always delightful to be with y'all. And I'd like to begin our time together with a period of quiet meditation. So I invite you to take a few moments to find a comfortable position and begin to relax, observe your breathing, for a few moments, become the observer in this time of contemplation. Which is to say, observe your feelings, observe the feeling of the flow of the breath of life through you and the energy in your body. Observe without attachment or resistance any feelings or thoughts that may be flowing through your consciousness. Recognize that the temporary states of the body are not yourself, but are directed by yourself. The stillness, the quiet, we open our hearts and minds to the Christ within. What is this Christ within? Gospel of John, we read the I am statements, reflecting the nature of the Christ within. I am the way, the truth, the life. I am the light of the world. Elsewhere we read the kingdom of God is within you. And Jesus saying, you are the light of the world. What is this I am, this light? It is a continuing, unchanging self. It is one with God. It is God, God's self. In Hinduism, they affirm Atman is Brahman and Brahman is Atman. The self is God and God is the self. The Hebrew scriptures, when Moses asks God, what is your name? God says, I am. This I am, this Atman, this Christ, is the truth of our being. Not the changing thoughts or feelings or actions. Not the conditions, not even the body. That which directs the mind, that which we may receive in the mind. The I am, the Christ. So we adopt this attitude in mind and feeling. I am. My mind and heart are open to the I am that I am, to the Christ, true nature of myself. This I am is perfect peace, is bliss, is pure being, pure consciousness. All thoughts and feelings and experiences flow in this consciousness, are contained in this consciousness, this universal identity, this true I am, this Christ, the Atman, Yahweh. As the mind is stilled, the I am, the self, directs it to a new awareness of divinity, the way, the truth, the life, the light. And our minds are filled with the truth of these thoughts. I am the way, the truth, the life, the light. Let the mind and the heart think and feel this truth of the self, of what you really are. The ideas and the feelings of the ideas echo through your whole being, through your mind, your heart, your body. I am the way, the truth, the life, the light. I am the way, the truth, the life, the light. I invite you to join with me in silence and in stillness, to allow these truths to unfold and echo and vibrate through every part of our consciousness. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, I am the light. In the stillness and the silence, we share this truth as one being and one self. We allow it to vibrate and transform all conditions within us and around us. Stillness and the silence, the self, the I am, the Christ, is revealed through our consciousness. Gratitude, joy, and bliss in our hearts. We continue in this awareness of the Christ, of the self, of the I am. We continue and we allow the vibrations of healing life, the illumination of divine light, the wisdom of the way, the unchanging eternal truth vibrate through us and through our world. So it is. Amen. Well, I thought since it was Palm Sunday, I should have a palm tree behind me. So there it is, the ocean moving. Long time ago, very long time ago, a man rode a mule into the capital of his country. He was surrounded by a cheering crowd, proclaiming him the king of Israel. That man was Solomon, who became a legendary king, famous for his wisdom, his wealth, and his long and peaceful reign. That was about 3,000 years ago. Many years later, a Jewish poet wrote a victory song, which included the words Hosanna, which means, "Oh, save us," and "Blessed be he who enters in the name of the Lord," and the phrase, the sentence, "Bind the festal procession with branches." Hundreds of years after Solomon was king, the people of Israel were conquered by the Babylonian Empire, and the wealthy and educated people were taken into captivity. Not long after that, Cyrus, the king of Persia, defeated the Babylonians and released the Israelites from the Babylonian captivity and gave them back their land and gave them resources to rebuild their temple. So in the Hebrew scriptures, this Persian king Cyrus is referred to as God's anointed or God's Messiah, or as we would say, Greek language, God's Christ. In celebration of that event, a priest wrote about the return of the people to Israel. And in that poem, in that writing, he alluded to the reign of Solomon because the temple was to be rebuilt. He wrote, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on an ass." And that priest went on to predict that God would triumph over all nations. These stories and passages from the Hebrew scriptures sound familiar to Christians because all of them are alluded to in the gospel stories of Jesus entering Jerusalem. This event, of course, is celebrated every year on Palm Sunday, the week before Easter Sunday, this Sunday. First three gospels mention people laying garments and branches on the road ahead of Jesus as he entered Jerusalem. It's only in the Gospel of John that palm branches are specifically mentioned. One thing I wonder about as a historian and as a Bible scholar is this: did Jesus intentionally orchestrate his entry and his followers to reflect the passages in the Hebrew scriptures? Did the gospel writers report what they'd heard from eyewitnesses? Or did the gospel writers construct the Palm Sunday story based on their readings of Hebrew scriptures? Well, this is a question of historical facts. What actually happened when Jesus went into Jerusalem with his disciples for Passover? All we know for sure is that only the gospel writers tell this story. There is no other mention of it in any other documents of the era, not even in the other letters and writings that we find in the New Testament. And perhaps not surprisingly, the rabbinical interpretations of Zechariah's passage about a king riding on a donkey, those rabbinical interpretations do not see it as a prophecy of Jesus as Messiah. We shouldn't be too surprised by that. Some do see it as a prophecy of a future messianic king who would defeat Israel's enemies. But again, they do not see Jesus as fulfilling the prophecy as they saw it. Some Bible historians interpret the passage as being about Zerubbabel, who was the governor of Judea after the Babylonian captivity and who got the people to lay the foundations for rebuilding Solomon's temple. However, as I look at these various interpretations, I have to admit that I have no idea what in fact happened when Jesus went in Jerusalem, and neither does anyone else. For Christians, there is, of course, a religious meaning to this story, and it is that Jesus was the prophesied Messiah, the Christ. For students of metaphysics, the Bible has deeper spiritual meaning beyond the literal meaning. When we look at the Bible from this metaphysical or mystical perspective, it doesn't really matter which of the stories are historically accurate and which are not, because the stories are told to convey spiritual meaning. And what we look for is, again, the deeper meaning, the mystical or metaphysical meaning that has applications to our consciousness and to our lives, to developing self-knowledge, knowledge of what the self really is, to what we call spiritual development. We get the deeper meaning and application to our lives using this method of metaphysical interpretation. Unity's metaphysical interpretation is, as you probably know, similar to some of the ideas that are found in Jungian psychology and in Platonic metaphysics, one of the great idealist traditions of Western thought. In simplest terms, Jung's theory of the collective unconscious is like Unity's concept of race consciousness. Jung's theory of archetypes fits with many of the metaphysical interpretations of Bible characters and stories, archetypal stories and characters. And Plato's theory of a realm of true forms or true ideas, a theory that is adopted in much of the mystical writings of the world. An idea that everything is based on these true ideas in divine mind is, of course, very much like Unity's ideas of Unity's metaphysical ideas, that reality, the eternal unchanging reality, consists of divine ideas in divine mind, and that our experiences are, as it were, manifestations or expressions of those divine ideas when we rightly interpret them. When we discover the deeper meaning of the biblical stories, we may see our own states of consciousness reflected in those meanings. Sometimes we see ourselves in the characters, we see ourselves in the stories. We may discover how we can more fully realize and express our divine potential by recognizing ourselves in the stories, our situations, and seeing how those stories have applications in our own lives. Metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, we see all the characters, events, and places as symbolizing the process of what might be called spiritualizing consciousness, of realizing truth, of realizing our oneness with God. So every character symbolizes an idea or an aspect of consciousness. Every event, every story plot represents or symbolizes a process in consciousness. And every place symbolizes a state of consciousness or a state of body. So another way of saying is that the stories symbolize how to manifest our divine potential as we see the characters as ideas and the places as states and the stories as processes. So the symbolism of the Palm Sunday story specifically is about realization of the divine idea for humanity, what we might call arriving at a recognition of our Christ nature, arriving at a recognition of our Christ nature. Carl Jung wrote that the Christ represents the self for Western cultures, and the Buddha represents the self for Eastern culture. And in our metaphysical Bible interpretation, we see Jesus, the Christ, and the stories as really representing the true divine idea of humanity, what the divine human potential is, the Christ consciousness, or we might say, your true self, that which is eternal and unchanging and which manifests through thoughts, feeling, body conditions. But we don't always recognize that truth. So this is a story of recognition, of shifting out of our old ways of thinking of ourself, our limited ways, our ways that have been conditioned by past experiences or what people have said about us or what we have said to ourselves, shifting out of that into a realization of the truth of our being. So in the story, in all of the stories in the Gospels, Jesus represents the self. We can, if we look back at the Hebrew scriptures, we can see that in the Hebrew scriptures, what's referred to as the Lord, the I am, Yahweh is the self, and all of the characters and so on are consciousness. And so the invisible and imageless self, Yahweh, the I am of the Hebrew scriptures, shifts into an idea of that I am embodied in Jesus. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, the divine idea. So in the story, Jesus, of course, represents the self. What about Jesus's followers? His disciples, his followers are all joining with him in this big parade, in this what we might equate with a victory parade. But instead of riding in a car or on a horse, Jesus comes in riding on a donkey. I just happen to think that, interestingly, there's a victory parade in Lawrence, Kansas this weekend. I used to go to the University of Kansas in Lawrence and their basketball team. So there's a parade, and this idea of a parade is just everybody celebrating some great victory. So this is a story about a victory of some kind, as well as the recognition of the Christ or the true self. So the 12 disciples closest to Jesus represent the fundamental abilities or aspects of the Christ consciousness: faith, love, understanding, and so on. The crowds following Jesus then represent thoughts and feelings related to those ideas, thoughts and feelings that are seeking and affirming the Christ self. They're celebrating the divine nature within. So we have these kinds of thoughts and feelings in our own consciousness at times when we recognize or are uplifted by this recognition that there is a divinity within us. Why does Jesus ride into a donkey in the story? This again is an allusion to the story of Solomon. Solomon was heading into Jerusalem, riding on a mule that belonged to his father David. He was riding in to be anointed, to be Christed, if you will, in that story, to be anointed as king. So the story of Jesus riding on the mule shows that Jesus' followers saw him as the rightful ruler of Israel. And they saw him as a ruler who was a person of humility, represented by the donkey in this case. Humility, wisdom, peace, the qualities that they associated with Solomon's reign. A ruler who would bring peace and unity and magnificence and abundance to the land. This was the perspective that's being expressed in this story. And we should recognize it's a direct contrast to the idea of a Messiah as a warrior and a ruler who would arrive with a great parade and with riding horses or in a chariot. So metaphysically, Jesus entering Jerusalem on the donkey symbolizes recognizing the nature of the inner Christ through humility, allowing the Christ nature, the divine nature, to direct the ego. So in a sense, the donkey also represents the ego, but the ego now in a humbled state. So why Jerusalem? Well, as you heard in the Daily Word this morning, Jerusalem can represent a state and consciousness of perfect peace. When we look more deeply at the symbolism of Jerusalem, one thing we might look at is, what does the word Jerusalem mean in Hebrew? What are the etymological roots of that word? And it actually means to be instructed in being perfect, friendly, safe, prosperous. That word shalom actually means a lot of different things, including perfection, friendliness, safety, prosperity. So if someone says to you shalom, they're not just saying peace, but they're also affirming friendliness and prosperity and so on. So it's a state of mind and body that's open to receiving the Christ consciousness in this story. This state, though open to divine instruction, this state of Jerusalem, that is, open to divine instruction, does not always understand or recognize that instruction. As we know this from the stormy history of Jerusalem that we read in the scriptures. When we put Jerusalem in the context of the scriptures, sometimes, as in Solomon's reign, Jerusalem was prosperous and peaceful, a place of magnificence. But other times, it experienced suffering and destruction. And other times, it experienced a rebuilding of the magnificence, the rebuilding of Solomon's temple, for example. So the state of consciousness that's open to divine instruction can alternate between being at peace and being disturbed or suffering. The peace follows acceptance and understanding of the divine nature. The suffering follows misinterpretation or internal resistance. Perhaps you've experienced that in your own life, in prayer and meditation, where you want to arrive at a state of peace and you're open and receptive to the Christ nature, but thoughts of the world keep intruding and disturbing you. past memories or things that you have to deal with, and you find it difficult to focus, you find it difficult to contemplate. And so, in being instructed in the divine nature and being instructed in perfection, it's not always an easy ride. You might find yourself at peace one day, confident, aware of love and beauty all around you, and the next day, or even the next moment, you might feel disturbed by some memory or event. If you get stuck in the disturbance, it's as if your mind has been captured and taken into captivity, as what happened with the Israelites. And that is when you most need to recognize your true self, that your true self is divine. It's something greater than and beyond your thoughts and feelings, and therefore it's something within you that's capable of ruling your thoughts and feelings to return you to that state of peace and prosperity and wholeness. So Jerusalem has this meaning of a state that is open to, but not always receptive to, or not always recognizing the Christ, the peace, the perfection. And of course, according to the story, when did they arrive? Well, they arrived during a holiday season, the great holiday of Passover, which commemorates the exodus of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and the beginning of their journey to reconquer the promised land, which of course included Jerusalem. So Passover represents liberation and salvation in divine timing and divine order. You may have noticed that as you affirm things and as you build your consciousness, things don't always manifest as quickly as you would like them to. They don't necessarily manifest in exactly the way you visualize them. Sometimes there is a resistance, inner resistance to be overcome. The Israelites were in Egypt for a long time in which they made no effort to escape. And even after Moses led them out, they resisted that liberation at times, as when they complained to Moses about not having as much food in the wilderness as they had had in Egypt and talked about wanting to go back. We're not always ready to hear and demonstrate truth. Our minds and hearts must be conducive to hearing and demonstrating truth. This is a choice of where we put our mental attention. We can choose to direct our attention either to divine ideas or to limit the limitations of appearance. When attention is directed to appearances, we can experience any kind of feeling. We can experience positive feelings and we can also experience negative feelings, but they all revolve around outer conditions. They're not anchored in the soul. When our attention is directed to divine ideas and we experience those ideas, what we experience internally is a deep sense of love and harmony, and faith, and so on, Christ qualities. We experience them and they vibrate through our minds, our bodies, and our conditions. In the stories, Jesus was not publicly recognized by his followers as being the Christ until this moment, until he entered into Jerusalem for Passover. This is most effectively described, this situation, in the Gospel of Mark. Mark is the earliest gospel. The other gospels are based on Mark. And in Mark, he tells several stories, Jesus healing people and doing remarkable things. And he tells people not to reveal who he is. He tries to keep who he is a secret. In that gospel, even when Jesus asked his disciple to say, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter says, "You are the Christ." And Jesus then tells his disciples, "Yes, but don't tell anyone." Bible scholars say that one of the themes of the Gospel of Mark is what they call the messianic secret. Jesus wasn't letting anybody really know who or what he was, what he represented. So before his entry into Jerusalem, the followers of Jesus were inspired by his teachings and his ability to heal, but there's a difference. Being recognized as a wise healer is not the same as being recognized as the Messiah, as ruler, king, Lord. In metaphysical terms, accepting the Lord is not about a confession of faith in Jesus as Savior. In metaphysical terms, it's about accepting your true self, accepting that at the foundation of your being is the Christ nature, and allowing that nature, that higher nature, to guide thoughts and feelings. It's only when our thoughts and feelings recognize and follow our divine true self that we are recognizing and celebrating our true nature. That's what's symbolized when the crowd, the thoughts and feelings, celebrate Jesus as king, the Christ self as the ruler of consciousness. The public declaration that Jesus was Messiah in the story, where the people shout out, Hosanna, O save, and blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This public declaration symbolizes a crowd of our thoughts and feelings recognizing and following and rejoicing in our true nature, the divine self, the I am, the Christ. This is arriving at the recognition of our Christ nature. Once the reality of Christ within is recognized, then the personal, limited sense of self dies, figuratively, not literally. You no longer think of yourself as only human. You no longer think of yourself in terms of limitations. You continue to see and express through your humanness, but you also see that you are more than that. You see that you are a spiritual being, an idea, we might say, in universal divine mind. You are an offspring of God. The realization of your divine nature precedes transformation. Old ideas of limitation dissolve. A new sense of self, the divine self, is raised up in consciousness. That's the meaning of crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. This dissolution of the old limited sense of self and the rising into a consciousness of oneness with the divine. The mystics through the ages have described their experiences of divine union as dissolving or merging of self or soul into God or nirvana. We see it even in the writings of Paul when he says things like, I die daily, or I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. Or when he tells his readers, Christ in you is your hope of glory. The mystical experience is transformational. It transforms everything about how ourselves, our lives, the universe even, are perceived. But even before the mystical experience, mystics have usually had some idea of the immanence of God, the idea of a divine presence with them or within them. Recognizing your divine self, even though it may not be a full realization of your divinity, is symbolized by Jesus entering into Jerusalem in what we now call Palm Sunday. This recognition is an inner state of consciousness when all your thoughts and feelings are following your Christ nature, are aimed and directed at that, are recognizing that. And according to the law of mind action, inner states always manifest some corresponding condition in the outer. So when you inwardly recognize the Christ, your true divine self, when your thoughts are going in that direction, when your consciousness is moving in that direction, this manifests according to the law in some kind of outer recognition. So the outer recognition may be that someone looks to you for advice, or someone compliments you for who you are or what you have done. It may come as an award or an offer of a new position. It could even manifest as healing or as an unexpected income. The little moments of surprising blessings that we recognize maybe as grace or blessings from God are actually manifestations of your inner recognition of that innate divinity, of that divine reality of your being. So I invite you to join with me in doing our best this week to move toward the celebration of Easter, to remember that this story, all these stories, are also about you, your thoughts, feelings, your innate divine nature, your Christ self, and all the thoughts and feelings that may be involved in experiencing that and recognize that. As you focus on the truth of your being this week, as you recognize Christ in you, also notice the little blessings or maybe big blessings that come your way. Because as you are recognizing and identifying with the divine self, it is inevitable that the law of mind action will manifest in some sort of outer recognition, showing you, demonstrating the truth of the Christ of you. In this process, we are entering a new Jerusalem consciousness. And that new Jerusalem consciousness we can see reflected in the scriptures, in the book of Revelation, of all places, chapter 21. The New Jerusalem consciousness that we are now entering is described in this way. And I saw a new Jerusalem. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling of God is with humanity. God will dwell with them and will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. Behold, I make all things new." Blessings. Happy Palm Sunday.
Shall we move a little bit in our chair? Get back into our body. Yeah. Thank you, James. Thank you very much. Happy Palm Sunday to you.
Thank you. Happy Palm Sunday to you. Thanks for bearing with me.
And your palms. They're beautiful. Really beautiful. So here we are back with each other. You're seeing people. Now you can't see us here in our sanctuary, but you know we are. And I see some of you. I'm curious if you allow me to ask a quick question about next Sunday. Any of you are going to join us next Sunday? I'm putting everybody on the spot. Any of you going to join us next Sunday in the sanctuary? I know, yes. Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I plan to.
Okay, Wilma, thank you. We need your warm bodies in here. I'm going to stop the recording. Careful with